We start out this book with Athena, the Greek goddess of war, talking to an assembly headed by Zeus, the king of gods and wielder of the lightning bolt. Athena is talking about Odysseus, the hero of the Trojan War, and how he got interrupted on his journey home by stabbing a cyclops in the eye. This angered Poseidon, god of the ocean and earthquakes, because his children were cyclops. Odysseus is now on the island of the nymph Calypso. Athena has Zeus send Hermes to convince Calypso to set Odysseus free, while Athena goes to inspire his son. While Athena acquires her human form and gets to Ithaca where Telemachus, Odysseus' son, lives, she sees many men trying to gain Penelope, Odysseus' wife, hand in marriage. While they do this, they are eating and drinking all of their supplies. Athena orders Telemachus to warn them off and then sail to the mainland for his father.
Book 2 begins with Telemachus being inspired by Athena and calling a council of all the men of Ithaca. One of the men blamed Penelope for not choosing them as a suitor. Antinous, one of the suitors, states that she would choose them after she finished her weaving, but secretly unraveled it at night, prolonging the selection of her new husband. Hot words were exchanged, and Zeus sends an omen. 2 eagles swoop down on the suitors, tearing cheeks and necks with their talons. Back in his hall, Talamus is greeted by Antonius, who suggests they share a feast together. Talamus replies that he would rather see him dead first, and the other suitors mock the young man for his fighting words. Later, Telemus would seek his nursemaid Eurycleia and have her prepare a meal for his crew and swear not to tell his mother of his departure for 10 days. That night, a black vessel would depart for sea with Telemus and Athena aboard.
Book 4. The travels were found at Pylos, located in the kingdom of Nestor. Telemachus asked the wise king to tell how and where his father had died. Nestor replied, told him what he knew of the Greeks' return of Troy. Athena caused dissension between Agamemnon and his brother. One wanted to set sail immediately, and the other wanted to hold a sacrifice. In the end, half the army left, but the other half stayed. One group broke off during the sail and rejoined the leader. The wise king fell in love with another. They later murdered the leader upon his homecoming. He was later avenged by his son Orestes. A storm blew the leader's brother all the way to Egypt. He lingered there, unable to return later until it was too late. Nestor suggested a trip to Sparta. He loaned Telemachus a chariot and another person to accompany him. After participating in a sacrifice to Athena, he set out for the kingdom of Menelaus.
Book 4, Telemachus and Nestor's son were welcomed by King Menelaus, I think, with great hospitality. They talked with Queen Helen, the girl that was stolen and the whole reason the war started. About how Telemachus was left behind because he was being accused of a traitor. I think that's the part of the story. I was really confused. And she blames herself because she had fallen for Trojans, Paris, and that's it, I do believe. Okay.
Book 5. As the dawn breaks on Mount Olympus, Athena puts the case of Odysseus before the gods. Zeus then sent Hermes with a message for Calypso to set Odysseus free. The very next day she led him to a pine wood and gave him tools to build a raft. It took him exactly 5 days to set sail. He sailed for about 17 days without any sight of land. Then finally an island appears on the horizon. Then Poseidon stirred up the sea, lashed up rain, and made Odysseus fall overboard into the ocean. Leucothea then came and gave Odysseus her veil to keep him from drowning by tying it around his waist. After 2 long days of drifting, a strong wave bears him straight into a rock. Odysseus then swims toward the mouth of a river, and then finds olive tree clumps and sleeps the sleep of the dead.
Book 6 of the Odyssey.
Odysseus washed up in the land of the Phaeacians. Athena went to the Phaeacian princess in her dreams. She convinced the princess to go down to the river to wash clothes. Odysseus woke and approached the group. The maidens ran away while the princess stood her ground. Odysseus asked her the way to the town. The princess told him and called back her maidens to feed and clothe him. Athena made him appear almost godlike to where the princess wished her own husband resembled Odysseus. The princess gave him the directions to the palace and told him to ask her mother for the way home.
Book 7. Odysseus entered the city of the Phaeacians. He asked directions to the palace, and Athena, in the form of a little girl, showed him the way. Odysseus was dazzled by the palace. Athena wrapped Odysseus in a mist so he could pass unseen from the king. He went to the queen and wrapped his arms around her knees for her to grant his plea, which King Alcinous arose and took Odysseus by the hand and was guided to the place of honor. He told of his departure from Calypso's island, sparing only one detail. Odysseus said that it was his idea to enter town separately. That night he slept on a deep pile of rugs and clean sheets.
Book number 8. King Alcinous promised his unknown guest passage home. He told his people to prepare the fastest ships and then come to a banquet. Once inside, Demodius began to sing of the Trojan War. It brought tears to the guest's eyes. When the king saw, he stopped Demodius and brought the athletes out. The athletes tried to impress the guest with discus, foot races, and wrestling. When asked if he would join, he declined, but one of the athletes thought this was an excuse. So, the guest got up and grabbed a discus. He threw it the farthest. Later that evening, the guest met a woman. She asked that he would never forget her. He replied by saying, "I will thank the gods every day for you." Next, Demodius began to sing again, and again the guest began to cry. When the king noticed, he stopped the singing and demanded to know who and where the guest came from.
Book 9 of the Odyssey. This tale starts with Odysseus telling of his crew's tyranny on Ismarus, and of how they didn't leave until they were ran back to sea, where they sailed for 17 days straight. After facing a horrible storm, they arrive at the next island, the island of the Lotus Eaters, a harmless people whose food made you never want to leave. So Odysseus explains how he dragged his no longer motivated men to the next island, the island of the Cyclops. Upon arrival, he is trapped and has to trick the Cyclops to escape with the last few of his men, all while angering the great god Poseidon, the father of the Cyclops.
Zeus made Aeolus the keeper of the winds, and this boat asked him to give them a steady breeze back to their home, which he did. And the crew members did not like the fact that the captain got to keep all the treasure that he got from the island, so they opened up the bag that Aeolus gave him, and it set loose a hurricane which brought them all the way back to this island of the Laestrygonians, which are giants apparently, and they threw rocks and destroyed their ships. Only one boat got away from the Laestrygonians, and it was the only boat, and it was the boat with the captain on board. They were blown all the way back to Circe Island, and that's where they stayed, and none of them wanted adventure, but they did have to. I'm done.
Book 11. At the edge of the ocean stream is a land which all journey after their death. When they are here, their spirits are a fleshless existence. Accordingly, as Circe instructed, bleeding a sacrificed lamb into a pit. Tiresias, a blind prophet, was the soul I needed to talk to. So I held all other shades at bay with my sword until Tiresias drank from the pit. He warned me about my journey home and told me what I needed to do to ensure that I had a happy death when it was my time. I met shades of famous women and heroes, such
such as Achilles, who was the best fighter at the Greeks at Troy.
Book 12. Odysseus and his crew heard sirens. Odysseus listened, powerless to steer toward shipwreck. Next came Charybdis, who swallows the sea in a whirlpool, then spits it up again. Avoiding that, they skirted to a cliff where Scylla exacts her toll. All 6 of her maws grabbed a sailor and ate it. They got to the island of the sun. Odysseus's men disregarded warnings and sacrificed Zeus's cattle. So at sea, Zeus sent a thunderbolt and smashed the ship. Only Odysseus survived and ended up on the island of Calypso.
Book 13. Odysseus is ordered to go to Ithaca. A rug is spread out for him and he sleeps. When they arrive, sailors put him down on the beach, still sleeping. He wakes up and wonders how he is going to protect the treasure. Athena casts a protective mist about him. She reveals herself. In joy, Odysseus kisses the ground. Athena transforms him into an old man. He goes off to find his faithful swineherd as instructed by the goddesses.
Book 14 of the Odyssey. Eumaeus, pictured here, is Odysseus' longtime friend and swineherder before the Trojan War. Odysseus and Eumaeus come in contact with each other on Odysseus' journey back from the Trojan War. The thing is, Eumaeus does not know Odysseus is, Odysseus, because due to Athena, pictured here, changing Odysseus into an old man. Eumaeus allows Odysseus to stay with him due to Zeus's commandments. Eumaeus also feeds and gives Odysseus a place to sleep, while Eumaeus sleeps outside in the rain.
Book 15 of the Odyssey. Athena tells Telecamnius to travel back home, but to watch out for the attack of the suitors. Back in Anika, Osydius has to listen to Emmanuus talk about his lifelong story. And Emmanuus told he was a son of a prosperous king whose realm was visited by Phoenicians. His nursemaid, a physician herself, was overtaken. On the journey home, she kidnapped Emmanuus and gave him to Osydius' father, who raised him up to be one of his own.
Book 16. Telemachus, who is Odysseus' son, finds out of his father's return, and then sends Emmaus to tell his mother. Athena makes Odysseus look like a god. Therefore, Telemachus takes him for a god. Odysseus claims, "No god am I." Once Odysseus returns, him and his son Telemachus plot to kill all of the suitors. Concerned that they might not win because of the odds are 50 to 1, Telemachus suggests that they might need reinforcements.
Book 17. Odysseus journeys to town, camouflaged as an old scoundrel. He runs into a goddard named Melanthius that keeps cussing while kicking him for no apparent reason. When he gets to his castle gate, his old dog Argos recognizes his big hero. As soon as he sees Odysseus, the poor faithful hound dies right there. Odysseus begs food from the suitors at the Athens. Antinous refuses to give him any food, not even crust. He then hits Odysseus in the back with a stool. It makes the suitors nervous. Sometimes the gods masquerade as mortals to test their righteousness.
This is Book 18 of the Odyssey. A beggar shows up to the palace. His name is Iris. He warns Odysseus off of his turf. Odysseus, not wanting any trouble, says there are enough pickings for the two of them. This didn't go well with Iris, and he challenged Odysseus, and the suitors egged him on. Odysseus rises to the challenge. The suitors are amazed by Odysseus' muscles. He doesn't wish to kill Iris, so he breaks his jaw instead with a single blow. Then another suitor, Eurymachus, wants revenge and tries to hit Odysseus with a footstool as Antinous had done.
Book 19. Odysseus has a long walk with his queen Penelope, but does not reveal his identity. Penelope takes kindly to the stranger and orders her maid Euryclea to wash his feet and lather them with oil. Euryclea, who was Odysseus' nurse when he was a child, notices a scar above the hero's knee. Odysseus had been struck by a wild boar while hunting on Mount Parnassus. As a young man, the maid recognizes her master at once, and her hand goes out to his chin, but Odysseus silences her voice so she will not give any his plot prematurely.
Book 21 of the Odyssey. Penelope appeared before the suitors in her veil. In her hand she held a bow left behind by Odysseus when he sailed for Troy. She said, "Whoever strings this bow and sends an arrow straight through the sockets of 12 axe heads lined in a row, that man I will marry." The suitors take turns trying to bend the bow to string it, but all of them lack the strength. Odysseus asks if he can try. The suitors refuse, fearing that he will succeed. But Telemachus insists, and his anger distracts them into laughter. Odysseus strings the bow and sends an arrow through the axe heads. At a sign from his father, Telemachus arms himself and takes station by his side.
My book started when the ringleader of the suitors was picking up his cup and taking a drink, and then the Odysseus shot him with an arrow in the neck. The goatherd had left to seek for shields and spears, as you see in this picture, and when they came back, the Athena was waiting for them. Athena had sent the rest of the suitors out to finish off everybody else that was left in the town, and then they took the housemaids or whatever and hung them in the courtyard to die.
Odysseus was angry with the housemaids who had gotten with the suitors in his absence. So he killed them all, left them for dead on the ground, and hanging by the tree branches. Then he asked those remaining to get on their finest clothing and dance in front of the mansion, so passerby would not see the madness. Penelope didn't want to realize it was her husband. She asked for a sign, then put his bed in the hall. When Odysseus found his bed, he was angry and disgruntled and talked about how hard he worked to build the bed and the room around it. When Penelope realized it was her husband, she jumped into his arms.
Book 24. Odysseus went to the vineyard the next morning where he saw his father, King Laertes, working like a peasant. Since his wife died, all this miserable man does is work. Meanwhile, the kin of suitors have gathered at the assembly ground. Laertes cast a lance through Atnus' father's helmet, who fell to the ground with a clatter. The fighting stops, though, at the command of Zeus, and Athena left to tell the story for years to come.